We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. Today, I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election, and we won it by a landslide. This was not a close election. You know, I say sometimes jokingly, but there's no joke about it. I've been in 2 elections. I won them both, and the second one, I won much bigger than the first, okay?
Stand up and fight. Stand up and hold your representatives accountable.
If we're wrong, we will be made fools of. But if we're right, a lot of them will go to jail. So, let's have trial by combat.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
We're seeing protesters overcome the police. The police are now running back into the Capitol building. We have cheers from the protesters that are watching behind the scenes.
I'm Sarah Kendzior, the author of the bestsellers The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight, and of the upcoming book They Knew, out in September.
I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the United States and rising autocracy around the world.
And we are sharing with you all our special on the January 6th attempted coup on our democracy, which Sarah and I announced in advance. And here it is. This is a time capsule of our instant reaction to a attempted violent overthrow to install a dictatorship of a deeply corrupt family, something that we had been predicting since forever, since 2016, since the start of Gaslit Nation in 2018. We recently ran a montage of episodes of all of our urgent calls warning that Trump was going to try to use violence in all sorts of ways to try to consolidate power and stay in power. And that part of this violent attempted overthrow of our democracy would include propaganda, disinformation, because that's where violence is seated, and political hate speech ultimately leads to violence. We saw that, as we've mentioned many times on the show, with the murder of Joe Cox in the UK, a wonderful public servant who was murdered by a far-right supporter, brainwashed by the whole disinformation machine, in the Brexit crime, which is very similar, of course, to the Trump crime that hijacked our democracy in 2016 and attempted to do so again in 2020 and is still ongoing. So what is really important about this is that it is raw, it is human. We are grateful that we captured this reaction. It was recorded exclusively for our Patreon supporters. That's where Sarah and I tend to let loose a bit more. We're a bit, it's unplugged. Our public episodes are like the Madison Square Garden concerts, and then our Patreon content is more like the coffee shop shows, more intimate, more personal. And as somebody who has written extensively about history and how to get into the minds and hearts of real life historical characters for my film Gareth Jones. And George Orwell is a character in that film. Walter Duranty, the New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning bureau chief for Moscow, who was the Fox News Tucker Carlson, a Soviet. He was a very, very effective instrument of authoritarian propaganda of his day and got away with it. So having to get into the minds and hearts of those people, what they were thinking as they were doing what they were doing and what was driving their decisions. I'm very grateful for any scraps I had that showed their human side, that showed their raw side, that helped them come alive as living, breathing people to me, because history is messy. It's not the sanitized version, neatly packaged and limited, very limited, that we get in school that's just brushing the surface. History is explosive because human beings are complex and can be explosive. And we've all sorts of messy, conflicting desires, needs, and so forth. And so any attempt to capture history as it's happening, including the very human reaction that's necessary for these inhumane times, is wonderful. And so I'm grateful that we did this. And to be prepared, this is very raw because it's a reaction to something we've been screaming about and warning about for a very long time. So we're very angry in this episode. So I'll let you take it from there, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the only things I want to say is we, of course, were not the only people who felt this way. We're not the only people who saw the Capitol attack coming, and we're not the only people, obviously, who reacted to it with intense emotion and dismay. And ever since Trump was elected, I wrote this article that got very popular in November 2016. I think it's called "We're Headed into Dark Times." And I encouraged everybody to keep a diary, to write down, your values and principles, to write down your expectations of your country, to write down descriptions of the reality surrounding you, because they are going to not only try to change that reality, but make you doubt your own memories, make you think that things that happened never happened, and that things that never happened did, and so on and so forth. And we saw that all throughout 2021 with how the narrative of January 6th was rewritten in real time by the people who carried out the attack, by their supporters, and by the enablers, by the people who refused to enforce accountability and pretend that all this stuff that we saw laid out and plotted on the internet and then aired on live television was somehow surprising. They want us to forget things. They want us to forget the impeachment hearings for the Capitol attack, which relied so heavily on public domain evidence that they didn't even call witnesses. So anyway, this is to say that any recollection you have of this is important. People will tell you that it's not. They will tell you to doubt yourself. They will tell you to doubt your knowledge, to doubt your instincts, to doubt your own mind. So it's good to write things down. It's good to look back on what you thought that on that day before people try to rewrite both the narrative and alter your expectations. Hold on to those old expectations of accountability, of justice, of democracy, even if you don't think that they're going to be met. That's the difference between, a righteous demand for accountability and pure nihilism or cynicism. Hold officials to the highest standards possible and honor your own memory, your own ability to understand events. Don't let people tell you that you are too unsophisticated to notice what's happening in front of your own eyes. It's a very common thing people are doing nowadays. And, that's one of the reasons that we named this show Gaslit Nation. We picked a very, very good name back in 2018, unfortunately. And so, this is going to be a tough day. We're recording this, what's today, the 4th? We're recording this on the 4th in anticipation of the anniversary on the 6th. God only knows what'll happen between then. It's going to be a hard day, but we're here with you. We saw the same things you did. We had the same reactions that a lot of you did. And that's perfectly fine. We are entitled to our beliefs, and they're actually a very important part of, establishing our collective memory and, moving forward in terms of justice and accountability.
And share with us on Twitter, anywhere you drop us a line. You can get our contact information on our website, gaslitnationpod.com, or tweet at us at Gaslit Nation on Twitter about what you were doing on January 6th, 2021, what that felt like for you, and share in this important preservation of our memory bank, this important journal of how we all felt at the time, this gross violation against our democracy and therefore our human rights. And just remember that, as Sarah mentioned, it's so, so important to keep a record of the truth. This is an important reminder. This whole episode is that we're running right now, sharing with you our initial reaction to what happened a year ago. It's an extraordinarily important and urgent reminder to stay human. Never allow them to take that away from you, your power to stay human. And we're going to be publishing this at 1:10 p.m. on Thursday, January 6th, 2022. 1:10 p.m. is around the time when Trump's army of supporters, which were incited by Trump and his family and supporters and his allies to attack our Capitol, to overthrow our democracy. 1:10 p.m. is around the time when Trump's army of supporters began attacking police.
We are recording. All right, everyone. This is going to be a rough, quick take on the attempted violent coup on our democracy, which was a mashup of every Gaslit Nation episode ever. Thank you for all your messages. We've been hearing from a lot of listeners who obviously saw this coming because they've been following along on the show. Sarah and I are two rockets of burning fury right now. And we have a lot to share with you. Sarah, do you want to just give me a moment to take a breath and bash this pinata for a moment?
Pinata full of Congress members. Yeah, I mean, I need a moment. This is one of these things where we're both so furious. Before we started taping this, we tried to get our primal rage out of our system. And just so you know, because of the time sensitivity of the crisis we're living in, we're just recording this quick and dirty without our audio editors. Right off the top of our heads, everything you're hearing will not be edited or altered in any way. So it puts a certain amount of pressure on us because we're so fucking pissed. It's the same thing over and over. We've had so many moments over the last few years where people say, oh my God, no one could have seen this coming. Or we're just overwhelmed with messages in Twitter and email and elsewhere saying that we saw it coming and that people called us alarmist, hysterical, and so forth. A few things about that. People rarely call us that anymore to our faces. They probably do behind our backs. That's the least of what we've had to deal with. We've had to deal with serious threats to our lives. I wrote about this in my book, In Hiding in Plain Sight. I briefly had to have a bodyguard. We're dealing with a mafia state. We're dealing with an aspiring autocracy. We're dealing with a violent neo-Confederate movement of domestic terrorists that invaded the Capitol building yesterday, and we are dealing with a Congress that has utterly abdicated its duty to protect the American people. Their own offices were raided. Their computers were tampered with. The windows of the Capitol are broken. The police let them in. The police are likely infiltrated. This is another thing we warned you about a long time ago, and they've gone on vacation. They are doing nothing. And so I want you to think long and hard about what that means for us and what that means for you and what that means for America in general. We have no one at the helm for the next couple of weeks. We've seen these little resignations from Donald Trump's complicit lackeys, and we're supposed to applaud them as if they weren't there plotting and abetting this all along. Those resignations mean nothing except that another open spot is left for even worse people to join in as Trump goes out with a bang. We have said from the start, the reason that he is in office and the reason that his backers brought him into this office, because it was not a fluke, it was well planned, was for the destruction of the United States, and a United States that is sick, and weak and broken and hurting is easier to take apart. A United States that has controlled opposition in certain parts of the Democratic Party, where people will do absolutely nothing, even if it's their own offices that are attacked, their own colleagues who are attacked, their own, building and place of work that stood there for hundreds of years is attacked. They'll do nothing. They will not enforce any accountability. They will not take any responsibility, and they will not protect anybody. And so Andrea and I have put ourselves in the spotlight, not because we crave it. We were both doing other things before all of this came along. The things we were doing are not things people do to get attention. You don't go and study Uzbekistan for 15 years because you want to be a media pundit. You don't go and make a film about Stalin because you want to be #1 on iTunes. Like, those are just not things that normally would have drawn a lot of popular appeal, but they did because they are so resonant with the times we're living in. And this is not a good thing. It is not a good thing when the times that we're living in mirror the times of, post-Soviet authoritarian regimes, of Soviet-era regimes, or of autocratic regimes in general. Because what happens during those times is that journalists and scholars and artists are threatened severely, and that people in general suffer severely. They lose their lives. And you know this. You've seen over 350,000 Americans die, even though we know that death was caused not by incompetence, but by malice, by stealing medical equipment, selling medical equipment, refusing to roll out the vaccine, lying about the disease itself, giving fraudulent medical advice. No one will stand up to them. And we are just so fucking sick of it. Like, we know that we warned all of you. And I want to say this is not aimed at all at anyone who subscribes to our Patreon, because obviously if you've subscribed to it, you've heard us say this many times. And I'm sure you share our frustration and you share our fear. It just doesn't help at all at this point to sort of say, so-and-so saw this first, or note that Andrea and I were early. It's very important for the historical record to know that we knew, and that other scholars and other people knew, because what's predictable is what is preventable, and they refuse to prevent it, and they use ignorance as a cover. And there's absolutely no excuse for being ignorant after 4 fucking years of this. And anyway, my point is, we're now down to the wire. He's officially there for 2 more weeks. A lot of destruction can take place between now and then. I do not think that yesterday's actions were the end. I've said from the start, we're likely to see a great deal of domestic violence in this time, and that it's not going to be like a 19th century style civil war. It's going to be a lot of shootings, bombings, stormings of federal property. These are all things we saw coming because they were already happening. They happened over the summer. They threatened to kidnap the governor of Michigan. They stormed multiple city halls. And, this is not the bulk of the Trump voters. This is not 70 million people. This is at best, I don't know, maybe a few, like about the number of people died of coronavirus at best, like maybe a couple 100,000, probably more, tens of thousands. It doesn't take very many people. It doesn't take a lot of people to cause an enormous problem. We know that through watching Timothy McVeigh and others throughout our lives cause enormous problems, mass shooters. And they're letting these people do that. The police are letting them do it. Congress is letting them do it. The Republicans are encouraging them to do it. Josh Hawley, Trump, the rest. And I see very few people rising up to stop it. And when people do rise up to stop it, whether it's anti-fascist fighters on the street or responsible Congress people like Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar, who are pushing for impeachment, Ted Lieu, who's pushing for impeachment and arrest, those representatives get dragged by the leadership of their own party. They get put down because Pelosi is complicit. And so are a number of her colleagues. And we've been spelling that out for 2 years as well in great detail. And we take a lot of shit for it, but you really, really need to watch it. It was a mistake to have her in as speaker. And I don't like the attacks on the squad or other representatives who did that, because I think they felt like, well, who else is coming in? They hadn't organized. They didn't have another option. This is not a woman who is loyal to the United States of America. And we've documented that in great detail. And you can go back and look at our old episodes and look at our threads and look at her own words. Never forget that Pelosi, in late 2018, when talking to one of her mega donors, Haim Saban, who has said himself he's a one-issue voter and his only issue is Israel, Pelosi said, out of the blue, if the Capitol crumbles, our foremost priority will be aid and commitment to Israel. The Capitol crumbles. Who says that? Why is she bringing this up at all? That was my gut reaction when I saw her say that, is why in the world are you talking about an attack on the US Capitol like it's something planned and preordained? Why is Haim Saban talking about it like it's planned or preordained? And why, most of all, would your sympathy not be with the traumatized Americans who have to witness a terror attack on their own country, who have to witness things being destroyed? And so that, honestly, was my first clue that there was going to be an attack on the Capitol. I've been worried about this for 2 years, and then other things obviously added to it. Michael Cohen's comments over and over about January 6th, about something was going to happen in DC on January 6th. Those started a few months ago. And then, of course, you have the militants themselves, the MAGA people, many QAnon people, Trump himself, all saying, yes, we're going to storm the Capitol on January 6th. We're going to, take back the vote. They announced their plans. There was so much opportunity for preparation and prevention. Instead, we see the police letting them through. No one apparently thought to see whether the police were infiltrated, even though they have been all year. 2, we see members of Congress leaving their doors open, leaving their computers open, not password protecting anything, thinking nothing about our national security, even though we were just cyber attacked by Russia in the worst cyber attack of all time. They are letting people in. We've said many times about how Trump has purposefully endangered our national security over and over again for 4 years. And we suspect that the cyber attack that happened was one that he and others in the administration, helped move along, particularly in the Treasury, for their own financial benefit and for their own power. I don't understand how Congress could be this criminally negligent to not have extra security, to not prepare for this when they knew it was coming. And the reason they knew it was coming is because the people who did the attacks told them that they were going to attack them. And anyway, I'll let you talk because I've been going off.
The most dangerous people in America are the ones telling us to move on, refusing to hold investigations, prosecutions, and arrest anyone, and refusing and not doing anything to remove the terrorist in the White House immediately. This is what this show has been about from the beginning, is accountability. If you see anybody, pundits, anybody talking about the nation needs to come together, we need to heal, we need unity, let's move on, we need Nuremberg trials for what we're undergoing now. We have the police and the military infiltrated by white terrorists who are letting them in through the front door. Literally, we saw that on video. This is a terrorist attack. As we have been saying since the beginning of the show, 2016 wasn't the start of a coup. It was the culmination of a coup. The stolen election, with the help of the mass murdering terrorist regime, the Kremlin, in 2016 was a 9/11 Pearl Harbor terrorist attack. And what we saw last night was another terrorist attack. And they're going to be more without accountability. And Pelosi and Jeffries, they must be called out for this. Everybody must be called out for this, about, this fake unity, which is so extraordinarily dangerous. We can't even, from studying authoritarian regimes, let me just tell you, Hannah Arendt, who stared the evil of the Nazi regime in the face, her conclusion was, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Throw that Hannah Arendt quote at anybody calling to move on, calling for unity. We need a deep dive investigation. We need prosecutions. We need sweeping arrests. If we do not have that, we are all in danger. Our children are in danger. That's so obvious. And that's where a lot of our fury is coming from, because we've been screaming about this. What we saw, that storming of the Capitol, the violent coup attempt, it was this horrific visual metaphor of how the media and Congress got steamrolled by these terrorists from the very beginning with threats that were hiding in plain sight. And let me just break down this for you, what an utter lack of accountability and overlooking all this and moving on looks like. In early 2017, Ukraine called in the FBI to help Ukraine find tens of billions of dollars stolen by Putin's puppet, Viktor Yanukovych, and his cronies. Yanukovych, of course, fled to Russia, who was helping him for several years, including while Yanukovych had his snipers firing on pro-democracy protesters. The American Republican operative who served Richard Nixon, who served Reagan, who was a longtime friend and neighbor of Donald J. Trump and his family, Paul Manafort, Putin's operative in Ukraine, who was using his dark arts to spread conspiracy theories, dividing Ukrainians against each other, and also turning a opposition leader into putting her in prison, lock her up, right? Who was sowing the seeds of division in Crimea against the US, which was later Crimea was invaded by little green men, as they called them. The military showed up and just seized it. It was a violent coup, what the Kremlin did in Crimea. Like what we saw yesterday on the US Capitol, but with soldiers without Russian insignia on them. They had no Russian flags on their uniforms. They just came in, these little green men, and took the Capitol, like what we saw yesterday. And Paul Manafort was well known as Putin's operative in Ukraine. The FBI was investigating him. And what happens? December 2015, FBI Director James Comey takes the head of the Russian mafia off the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And Paul Manafort waltzes right into our election and runs Donald Trump's campaign for president. Mm-hmm. They knew who he was. I fucking knew who he was, you know? And instead, what does Comey do? He holds a surreal press conference about Hillary Clinton's emails. He writes an October surprise letter about Hillary Clinton's emails, tipping the election to Putin's puppet. And then Comey comes out just the other day, this week, saying Donald Trump should not be investigated. He should not be prosecuted because Comey is selling a book. That is
it's worse than that. It's because Comey doesn't want to be investigated. You know, that's what I think. It's like partly about his profit, but it's about the fact that he let this happen. He took Semyon Mogilevich off the list. He's the one, who follows in the footsteps of two previous FBI heads, Louis Freeh and Jeff Sessions, who went on to work for Mogilevich, who went on to work for the Russian mafia, who are deeply connected to Paul Manafort and his inner circle. Comey does not want all of this revealed. They do not want that institutional complicity revealed. Every time somebody calls somebody a, quote, institutionalist, what they really are doing is whitewashing that person's criminality, which has been made legal through the systems that they have hijacked. That is who James Comey is.
Exactly. And just anybody, Jeffries, Pelosi, pundits calling for this unity and moving on, they're pulling a Comey and they're putting us in danger. There can be no moving on for this. So all the predictions that we've been making on this show from the very beginning, the police are a terrorist force. The white supremacists, the militia, they're gearing up. They're coming after us. They're traitors. They want succession. They're all being fueled by the Kremlin. The Kremlin loves this. This is asymmetrical warfare. They're using our weakest links against us. All the dark money fueling the GOP. They're all in it together. This is a slow motion civil war. All the stuff we've been saying, all the warnings and predictions. This is our latest one. If we do not have accountability, if we do not have sweeping arrests, prosecutions, we are in danger. We are in massive danger. And anybody who doesn't fight tooth and nail for this, they're traitors, plain and simple. It's not even they're complicit. They are putting us in danger, just like Comey put us in danger.
Yeah, complacency is complicity. I mean, there is no line between that anymore. The chance to turn this around was 2019. And I know a lot of people were confused about how adamant Andrea and I were that, the Mueller team, hurry up the probe, interview and indict every culpable person, including people like Jared Kushner, figure out ways that if, the targeted parties, the investigated parties try to manipulate the probe, that there's some kind of backup plan. Of course, there was not. Of course, there was a parade of propagandists online assuring you Mueller's got it. Mueller's just, dotting his I's and crossing his T's, apparently forgetting to do so on the word indict. And that was a propaganda operation. And, we were targeted by that. And the people who were spearheading that were people who were connected to Rupert Murdoch and to other right-wing operatives. There is a giant propaganda movement to tell you that everything is fine. You just need to wait it out. You just need to watch our great leaders play 3D chess. And then the exact same propaganda tactics were used on Pelosi when, in the exact same week that the Mueller probe ended, she announced that there would never be impeachment of Donald Trump because he was, quote, not worth it. And as we've explained many times, when she said this, what she meant is America is not worth it. You are not worth it. Your survival is not worth it. Your children are not worth it. None of you are worth it. And she made good on that promise of thinking we are not worth it because we now have over 350,000 dead Americans who did not need to die. And so we pushed for impeachment. We wanted an impeachment that was rigorous and broad and covered all of the offenses that Trump committed in office, and that also brought forth the necessary context that we were just discussing about the Russian mafia and the infiltration of our institutions by mafia and mafia affiliated actors. For example, what we brought up with Comey, we felt that all needed to be aired out, and that if people understood just how deep this went, just how awful this corruption was, there would actually be real unity in this country. I mean, these guys go on and on about how much they want unity, whereas the real push for unity lies in just almost universal disgust with the corruption of our leadership and institutions. The people who stormed the Capitol yesterday, the terrorists who stormed the Capitol yesterday, their alleged beef is it's corrupt, it's a swamp. There are, child trafficking, blackmailer peddlers. That's correct. I mean, all of that is correct. The problem is that they don't see that the leading people of that group are Donald Trump, connect to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, a lot of people like to put all this stuff in the conspiracy theory badge, and is very well documented, has been to court many times. It had predecessor operations with Craig Spence. There's a lot of pent-up frustration about how such sadistic, depraved, disgusting individuals got away with the worst crimes possible, with abuse of children for profit, and also to hijack the national security of multiple nations for a long time. I mean, this kind of shit, when you investigate it, it can make you go nuts. And I've, interacted with people who kind of started out in QAnon, like they wanted information about these subjects. They grew a little skeptical of QAnon. Sometimes the friend or a family member concerned about them and their flirtation with QAnon lent them my book or introduced them to this show where they got other information about Epstein. And they felt like, okay, now I get it. I wasn't crazy to think all this was happening. This really is happening, and the media really is covering it up, and our officials really aren't holding anyone accountable. However, all this other shit about JFK Jr. rising from the dead, or zombie cannibals, or whatever they're going on about, is not backed up by evidence. I'll just put it that way. Anyway, my point is, they could have done this. They could have had a massive round-the-clock impeachment trial in which the whole dirty truth of our country was brought to the fore. And I still think that this is necessary. I think this is what the Biden administration should do now, because I think, as Andrea said, if we do not do this, we will die as a country. I think truth is the only way forward. You cannot have accountability without the truth. You cannot just go around randomly, arresting people or saying so-and-so needs to be locked up. You need to present your case, and you need to do it without partisanship or political ambition or anything but the utmost humility about the profound failure of our country and its institutions. And then from there, I do think it is possible we can rebuild. What frightens me is that I see among our elected elites no desire to rebuild. No desire to hold people accountable for horrific crimes, the abuse of migrants on the border, the handling of the coronavirus, for deaths. They don't want to hold people accountable for the deaths and the abuse of kids. I'm sorry, I get emotional because it's so hard for me to believe that there's so little, just nothing, like they feel nothing. When they see these images, when they read the obituaries of these victims, our leadership, certainly the GOP, but also Pelosi, Jeffries, the rest, they feel nothing about the situation. And that's a frightening thing when you have a moral void in a position of power. And so, God, I mean, it's just very upsetting to talk about because this is how countries die. This is, the end of the Soviet Union was somewhat like this. You saw, a gerontocracy leading it. You saw incredible corruption from within, natural disasters that were preventable, or not natural disasters, I'm sorry, man-made disasters that were preventable, like Chernobyl, wars that the country was dragged into, quagmire wars for a long period of time. I mean, all this sounds very familiar, but the biggest sin, and, obviously the roots of the Soviet Union are very different than America, the ideology, the goals, the setup of the administration. But what is similar is the just deep entrenched corruption, the secrecy, and the aversion to the truth. That's the position that we're in now, and we don't deserve that. No one deserves to suffer under a government like that. And there are more and more governments like that every day. The UK is heading in that direction. Hungary, Poland, Turkey, so many other countries have changed so drastically in the last 10 years in the wrong direction. And a lot of it just has to do with a refusal to enforce accountability or even admit the depth of the problem. Even when your own capital is being torn to the ground, even when you have domestic terrorists sitting in the Speaker of the House's chair, leaving her nasty notes, they won't do anything. They won't punish them. They go on vacation.
So even Jeff Merkley, a senator of Oregon, who's one of the better ones, even he was saying that, oh no, we shouldn't impeach Trump. Let's just focus on getting through this and moving ahead. And then he gets called out on Twitter. And now he's saying, impeach Trump now, 25th Amendment, he must be removed. So what we're saying is that there's a culture inside Congress where even the good ones can lapse into acting like Homer Simpson in the nuclear reactor, sleeping on the job with a donut in his mouth. There's an air they're all breathing that is disconnected from the larger reality. And that's why we keep saying the most reliable power we have is grassroots power. And we've seen that in the miracle of Georgia, the 10-year in the making miracle of Georgia. So do understand, if you're feeling crushed right now, we feel that too. But at the same time, we have full faith in the American people. What the problem is that our elected leaders do not. They're not being honest with us. They're not taking the stands that desperately need to be taken to protect the very soul of our nation. They're not amplifying the voices and the leadership and protecting those people that are national treasures right now, because they're seeing us through this in such an honest and empathetic way. And so it's those people that we have to amplify and get behind, the Katie Porters, the AOCs, Ilhan Omars, and others who are literally putting their lives on the line by doing this. And so I do have faith in the American people, and we have to, all of us, gather together and just scream from the rooftops that we just demand accountability, just demand it, because we're not going to get through this as a nation without it. And the biggest fear I have is what we saw with the Republicans in the House. The House is a nuclear weapon that could easily take down our democracy. It could be the final death blow on us. Think about it this way. The Senate has only one Josh Hawley. The House has several Josh Hawleys. And the Republicans are very close to getting a majority. If we do not have, over the next 2 years, the Democrats in the House showing strength, showing conviction, showing moral leadership, showing the American people accountability, investigations, prosecutions, change, they are screwed in 2022. Because if Pelosi leads over the next 2 years, like she did over the last 2 years, they're losing the majority. There's no other way. There's no better way to show people their vote doesn't matter if you don't use your power that you were elected to use. So things absolutely desperately have to change now. And I'm scared. I'm so scared that in 2022, it's going to be the same Pelosi and her majority is going to be picked off. And now the Josh Hawleys control the House. And if we lose the Senate too, because we're barely holding on to the Senate, if the Republicans control Congress in 2022, it's going to be painful Civil War time. And Biden's going to be stuck, and it's going to make 2024 even harder for us to hold on to the White House. So we're in this for the long haul, and these damn Democrats have to get on a war footing and stop acting like this isn't war. Putin is waging war against the US. He has been for a very long time. He is winning right now. The Kremlin must be watching these images on repeat. Let me just tell you, the revolution in Ukraine, which was driven by independent journalists and activists, it was a grassroots movement, a leaderless movement. Europe and the US tried to get the Ukrainian protesters to back down and accept Yanukovych and move on. The protesters themselves said, go fuck yourselves. This guy has to go today or we're going to run him out. And that's what they did. The people on the ground forced accountability, and they got it against the wishes of Europe and against the US. That was a grassroots, pure revolution from the bottom up. Putin, with his propaganda machine, called that revolution a coup and said it was a top-down revolution funded by the CIA. I have a lot of well-meaning people on the left who have come up to me and repeated those same Kremlin talking points. What we saw yesterday was a coup from the top, funded literally by the Kremlin. So this is extraordinary to watch. That Putin is masturbating to all this footage right now. And
sorry.
But and you have to understand that this is, how the hell are we going to get into alliances, strengthen alliances, when we look so deeply unstable, when we have this ticking time bomb that we're forced to live with, which is called the Republican Party? All of that disgusting, smirky smiles and jokes we saw from from Sass, from Lindsey Graham, from the stupid speech given by Mitch McConnell. These people are traitors. These people are traitors. They cashed in on blood money. They fed this beast that was destroying us from the inside, that was destroying families on the border, that was traumatizing. I can't watch this shit anymore. I really can't watch these traitors anymore. It's hard. It's hard what they're doing to us. But understand, we are going to get through it because we're fucking pissed. And my enemies list is so long now. And it's like, I'm not going to let these guys rest. We have to fight like hell. We have to stay together. We have to stay organized and come after them in 2022 and 2024. How you're feeling right now, bottle that up and just put it inside yourself and let it fuel you in all the work you do to stay vigilant, stay engaged. Every time this shit happens, I get in world domination mode where I start making plans and I start seeing a vision of the future that I want. And I start getting ready. Do you understand? So you need to do that too. You need to set up your auto donations to Fair Fight Action. You need to start amplifying all the people who are demanding accountability. You need to start educating yourselves on how the whole process of running for office works so you can help good people come to power. We need to flush out the system. Pelosi screwed us. We cannot tell you that more plainly. Pelosi screwed us. And the people are so much smarter than she gives them credit for, because what they did was they expanded her squad, which weakened her power, which put the squad in positions of power now in the House. And her idiot moderate Dems that were afraid of their own goddamn shadows and talking out of both sides of their mouth and not not addressing that we were under attack and at war. They're gone now. She does not have them, those freaking conformists to protect her now. She's out. I cannot tell you, like, if she continues the way the next 2 years, we're screwed. So we cannot let that happen. We cannot count on her to save the day. They're all at recess now when this maniac, this terrorist, must be arrested, dragged down handcuffs today.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, you don't go on recess without intention. They know exactly what the consequences of going on recess are. This is true of the House. This is true of the Senate. They know that they have a sadistic sociopath backed up by transnational organized crime, already impeached for a crime, individual one in a federal probe, linked to multiple hostile regimes, working as an asset for the Kremlin for decades on end, encouraging violent attacks on the American people, on American monuments. They've decided to let him tear this country down. They've decided to utterly abdicate their duty to just let people rot. And let me remind you that as all of this goes on, there is a pandemic that is at its absolute height, where we need competent government, we need federal oversight, and we need people monitoring the vaccine and making sure that a literal death cult isn't sabotaging that. You know, we've already seen that as well. Like, one of Trump's goals was mass death for the sake of mass death. That is how he is. And in Hiding in Plain Sight, I document this, his fascination with, you know, the ability to kill hundreds of thousands of people quickly. This is something he's professed that he's wanted to do for a long time. He usually would talk about using nuclear warfare, and he would talk about how it made him feel nothing. He had this kind of abstract curiosity about it. He's going to keep going. And at this point, his pride, to some extent, is injured, but I think he gets off on being the victim. He gets off on being the martyr, and he's going to go out in a fit of annihilatory rage. And every, psychiatrist who's an expert on narcissism, on sociopathy, has been warning about this from the very start, you know, that this is kind of akin to an abusive relationship, and you finally have the abuser, leaving. And that is the most dangerous point for the abused person, because there's no controlling them. They'll do absolutely anything. And we saw that yesterday. And the fact that this danger is so clearly demarcated, and we now have proof in the shattered glass of the Capitol and the body that was taken out of it in the ransacked office, like, there's no hypothetical here. It's happening. And they've decided to shrug their shoulders and let people die. And, you know, one thing I'm worried about, and I've, mentioned this before, is I don't think this will be limited to DC. I was worried about this specific day, about January 6th in DC, as I said, because of these strange comments from Michael Cohen, from Pelosi, from Lynn Wood, from other people associated with QAnon. I can see this being replicated at city halls, in state capitals, and other places around the country. We still don't know exactly whether the Nashville bomber was operating alone. We know that he was somebody who believed in 5G conspiracy theories and was probably acting to destroy infrastructure. We also know there's a massive infrastructure attack by Russia that no one is doing anything about. Like, you have to ask yourself, why is Congress abdicating? Why are they thinking that the next 2 weeks are something that we're going to just magically survive? And then Joe Biden comes in, and then what? Because the thing is, once Joe Biden comes in, they're going to try to kill Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the rest of the Democrats. And that's not something I'm just inventing. That's literally their plan. Like, they've been announcing it all over Twitter, all over social media. That's why a lot of them aren't on Twitter anymore. They're on Parler. Everybody who studies these movements takes these threats very seriously. People like Talia Levine and others who have looked at this closely, especially people who were there for events like Charlottesville and have since been studying white supremacist movements, militant movements, conspiracy theorist movements full of violent people, and so forth. They've all been warning, of course, this is not going away. Of course, this is going to get worse when the balance of power changes, at least on the face of it, to the Democrats. They're going to want some retaliatory action, and the danger will remain. And the thing that's terrible about this is that there is a way out of it. Like, that's why Andrea and I are so frustrated. It's not that because we feel like we are permanently doomed for eternity. It's that we keep seeing pathways out, like all the things we suggested in 2019, or sometimes more local things. Like, the reason we pushed so hard for the Georgia election is because we knew it would lead to an actual change in power if they succeeded, and they did, thanks to the perseverance and resilience of Stacey Abrams and organizers, largely Black organizers and activists on the ground. Like, it is possible if you actually confront the problem and you work very hard and you take nothing for granted and you never fucking, turn your back or avert your eyes from the danger at hand, which is what they've chosen to do. And it is a choice. And that's the part that I can't get my head around. Because to me, it just feels like more participation in the death cult. That you have a GOP death cult, linked to a mafia syndicate that truly sees all human life as disposable. And then you have a cult, in certain factions of QAnon, where they literally think this is the apocalypse, that Trump is some sort of Christ-like figure. This is the end times, and therefore human life is disposable because people become martyrs. And this is true in any kind of, religious extremist ideology. Why is Congress abetting this? Why are they just kicking back? Like, we can't do a citizen's arrest here. We're just sitting here trying to protect our families, trying to not get coronavirus, trying to just literally survive the next 2 weeks. And we need actual people in our institutions to do their job for the basic survival of our nation. It's so important. Like, maybe you're an elected official and you didn't think this is how things would go once you got into power. Like, maybe you thought this would be cushy. Maybe you thought you just pushed through some bills. Well, guess what? You're on the precipice of history. You are the make it or break it people. When people look back decades from now, they're going to be looking at you and every decision that you make at this time and who lived or died as a result of that decision. So think hard about what you're doing now. Think hard about whether you really want this fucking vacation, whether it's worth that much to you or whether human life is worth more.
And speaking of the apocalypse, what we are witnessing is a zombie apocalypse. You remember since 2011, 2012, there's been all these zombie apocalypse memes and people actually going out in the streets of New York and acting out a zombie apocalypse. I'm not kidding. Do you remember this from a decade ago? This was a thing.
Well, I remember thinking that this was such a flavor of the time, just like George Romero's movies getting so popular when the population was in this sort of 70s stupefied mass consumerism because all hope had been sucked out of the world mold. But anyway, yeah, go on.
But that's what this is. It's a zombie apocalypse because they are brainwashed. And big tech, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, the Google juggernaut, they're all complicit in this. They're all complicit in bringing down our democracy, like they're threatening democracies around the world. And this is going off on unchecked. They're finally freezing Donald Trump's social media accounts a little too late. And then, of course, we have the far-right consolidation of media, Fox News, Tucker Carlson, a traitor, broadcast to millions of homes across the country, brainwashing people. So there has to be executive orders, a coming together. Biden needs to gather Dorsey, Zuckerberg, all, the companies that advertise on Fox and One America, Newsmax, and whoever those shareholders and investors are, get them all together in a room, pass executive orders, clamping down on that because it is a virus and it is killing people. It is killing people. And so this needs to be, this disinformation virus has to be confronted like this is on war footing, because this is what this is. We're at war. It was the Kremlin that attacked us, driving a civil war. And now it's a civil war. We're going to have more bombs, more terrorism, people blowing themselves up. This is where we are now. And unless there is sweeping strength and action and accountability and forcing these people who are complicit, the Zuckerbergs, the Jack Dorseys, the advertisers on all these far-right propaganda weapons. They're not channels, they're not outlets, they're weapons being used against us. This is how countries fall apart. They turn on each other. this is why unity matters when you are the opposition, not unity with the enemy. And you're saying, oh, but you're calling them an enemy. How you're contributing to this hate speech. They're traitors. And sedition is against the law. And there's laws for dealing with this. And what we saw were just a couple dozen people arrested. Meanwhile, the George Floyd protests was a police state against protesters.
And you're seeing sorry, go on.
No, but Sarah and I have full faith in the American people. We're crying and we're angry because we don't have full faith in the incoming Biden White House and the Democrats who like to abdicate their power.
Yeah. And I was so disgusted the other day when I saw a tweet from the propaganda apparatchik, Maggie Haberman, whose family literally served as Trump and Kushner's PR agents. The New York Times likes to leave that out of her biography. But anyway, she was comparing, what we saw yesterday to the George Floyd protests. And I mean, it was so vile. It was so disgusting, both because of, as you just mentioned, the discrepancy in how the police behaved, how, they came out and formed their line against Black people who were pushing for freedom, pushing for the right to not be murdered by the police, putting together a protest out of empathy. But it's just like that they can't see the difference between this. Like, what we have here are people who stormed the Capitol and broke into it because they want less democracy. Like, this is the opposite of what you see in basically any protest around the world that's not staged by some sort of, mafia style elite. You see people who will break into, the chambers of government because they want more freedom or more justice or more fairness or the Constitution of their country to actually be honored or their dictator to be taken away. That's why they have protests in Belarus. That's why they have protests in Israel. That's why 10 years ago, we had the Arab Spring. That's the general tenor of protests where people will break into government buildings. The people who broke in yesterday want an autocracy. They want a one-party state. I doubt it's a monolithic group. I don't know the motivations behind everybody who participated in it. I think some people were pulled into a disinformation wormhole through all the tech companies that you just mentioned, and we need to analyze how that disinformation was spread. And there are already, researchers who are doing that, researchers who have recommended again and again, you've got to ban, these groups because they're going to cause physical violence. They're going to lead to people's deaths. And that is indeed what happened. But it's just disgusting. Like the way people talk in these broad, unspecified ways about things like unity or freedom without qualifying, like, what do they mean? Unity with whom and for what purpose, to what end? Freedom for whom? At whose expense? Like, those are the questions the media doesn't want to ask because it opens up systemic injustices and institutional failures that often exist in their own media corporations, and they don't want to confront them at all. It's the ultimate both sidesing. It's so facile and superficial, but it's also just profoundly dangerous. And something that's been very kind of irritating to me and Andrea and to so many others who've been warning about this. People like Bree Newsome, Jared Yates Sexton, Anand Girahandas. Like, there have been a lot of people who warned about this. And then we get all these why are people paying attention to Chuck Todd instead of to, Gaslit Nation? And it's like, just ignore the fucking Chuck Todds of the world. If you see good information, lift that good information up, help spread it, because these companies, these conglomerates are never going to reform. They are in bed with, PR agencies, with hostile state actors. They've been cowed, they've been threatened, and they've been cowards. We've seen a lot of reporters come out recently and say, yeah, I tried to report on this story. I tried to report on this January 6th potential attack. My editors wouldn't let me. Or I tried to report on Trump's organized crime. Editors wouldn't let me. And often the editors are being directed by CEOs. This is an old story. David K. Johnson, for example, one of the biggest investigative reporters of Trump, like a priceless resource on him. He couldn't get anything published about it in 2015 through 2016 because the media was controlling the narrative for the benefit of Donald Trump, so that the things that would horrify his base would not be revealed. Things like the Epstein-related rape cases, things like him working with drug traffickers, things like him having Trump Tower be a dorm for the Russian mafia. Lots of these Trump voters were pretty excited to vote for an open bigot, for a white supremacist, a xenophobe, a hateful person, someone who wants to, quote, own the libs, someone who hates Hillary Clinton as much as they do. Those are all very attractive qualities in Trump, for them. But, what no one likes is a kleptocrat. No one likes a thief. No one likes the mafia. The very qualities that all of these Trump voters are complaining about are embodied in Donald Trump. And that's the story that the media did not want out then, and they still don't want it out. That's basically why I was kicked off of American TV, yet now appear on Canadian and other television, places, because they treat me like a regular journalist who's broken a story. In America, they still have to cover up for the perpetrators of the crime because a lot of those people roam their own hallways. You could see this documented extensively in Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill, about NBC, Harvey Weinstein, Black Cube, all of these horrific entities. So what I'm saying is, as Andrea always says, is grassroots power is the only power. It applies not just to politics, but to media and to any other element of your life. Like, we need to get out of this mindset where success is somehow defined or dictated by adhering to the preferences of incredibly mediocre white men who are upholding a transnational crime syndicate masquerading as a government. Success is how you treat people. Success is what you bring into the world. Did you leave it a little better, than how you found it? Like, those are sort of ways to live that are not based on money or fame or prestige or all of these hollow inquiries. We could be a better nation, but we have to prioritize what our values are. And this attention economy can be just extremely gross in that way, because I think we lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture is always, who is suffering, who is abetting the suffering, and how do we stop the suffering? The answers to that are very clear right now. So I just encourage everybody to speak out, speak to your representatives. Don't play this little, worship game, this standing, these little personality cults. Throw all that shit away. You deserve a better government. You deserve a better life, and you deserve the truth. And that's not complicated. So just try to hold on to that for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, America still stands a chance to get through this once the brain drain starts and all the top talent, especially coming from abroad, instead of coming to our universities, our companies, they choose other countries out there that they feel are safer and better for their kids, and people start leaving. Once that brain drain starts, that's when things are dire. Mm-hmm. And so we still have a chance. We still have a lot of faith in the American people. Look to Georgia for hope. Look to Georgia for hope. A young Jewish senator and the pastor, the reverend of Martin Luther King's church, now in the Senate. That's the civil rights story. That's the legacy of the civil rights movement right there. So that's where we're headed. That's what we're going to fight for. So please don't abandon us. Don't abandon each other. We're going to get through this. We have no choice, and we have a lot of talent here that deserves our support and our attention, and we're going to uplift each other, and that's how we're going to get through this.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
We want to encourage you to donate to your local food bank, which is experiencing a spike in demand. We also encourage you to donate to Oil Change International, an advocacy group supported with a generous donation from the Greta Thunberg Foundation that exposes the true costs of fossil fuels and facilitates the ongoing transition to clean energy.
We also encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Afghanistan. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. You can also subscribe on YouTube.
Our production managers are Nicholas Torres and Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Bissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Jess Sauer,
Chick Quinn,
Lily Wachowski,
Megan McNerney,
Sean Rubin,
Todd S. Perlstein,
Pat,
Kenny Main,
John Schoenthaler,
Frank Jaquette,
Ellen McGirt,
Joe Farron,
Larry Gasson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Lex Reed,
Andrea Scalzo,
or Andrea, we don't know, Karen Heisler,
Jordan Sanders,
Ann Bertino,
T.R. Dunstan,
John Millette,
David East,
Stu,
Shannon Nacy,
Ida,
Chris Fellow,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Rich Holcomb,
Thomas Scheibe,
Kelsey Malsom,
Julie Matthews,
Meganopolis,
Mark,
Barbara Kittredge,
Matthew Womack,
Silas Frank,
Sean Berg,
Kristen Custer,
Tracy Ash,
Benjamin Galuza,
Kat Gillis,
Kai Gillis,
Kai Gillis,
Sharon Hattrick,
Irv Robinson,
William Barry Reeves,
Richard Smith,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Yvonne Q,
Mike Christensen,
Sandra Kalmans,
Katie Masuris,
John Laughlin,
Jeff Thompson,
James D. Leonard,
Leo Chalupa,
Carol Gulstadt,
Michael Wood. My eyes are watery. Michael Woodridge.
Crimer, no criming. That always makes me laugh. I've said it so many times. I think it's all that Dora the Explorer era of my children's life. Anyway, go on.
Every time. Jason Benke,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Jeremy Lewis,
Joel Newman,
Trigve,
Christine M,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
Nicole Spear,
Brian Tajudin,
Maureen Murphy,
Michelle Dash,
Abbey Road. I don't know. Is that it may be a rude name.
I don't know.
It's a cool name. It's a cool name. We're pro your name,
thrilled.
no
We're
matter
thrilled
what it
here.
is.
Jans Alstrup Rasmussen,
Victoria Olson,
Alabama,
ZW,
Jason Bainbridge,
Sarah Gray,
Mike Tripico,
Diana Gallagher,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
Piet Yitzma,
David Porter,
Kate Cotton,
Kim Mellon,
Leah Campbell,
Lynn Schneider,
Jared Lombardo,
Karen Humphreys,
Eric Kaplan.
Tanya Chalupa.
Thank you all so much for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Thank you.